Hey everyone, so today's video is actually something slightly different. It is actually a request from a viewer in my previous deck tech video. So the viewer said, hey, have you looked at Attila's Colleimiya Keqing deck? I can't really figure out what the combos are, I can't really figure out what characters to send out first. So I decided to look at the deck and I thought, yeah, I like Keqing as a character, I like Collei as a character. In the TCG, Collei is busted, and I never really learned how to play Yoimiya. I've been putting it off and I just haven't really, gotten the time or couldn't be bothered to figure it out, even though she's a really good character as well. So I thought, yeah, I'll give it a go and create a deck guide and see where things go from here. So if you don't already know, Attilla is actually a really good player based in the American server. They actually went 5-0 in the previous weekly tournament in the Genius Invocation TCG Discord. So I didn't actually manage to get a response from Attilla on what are some ways I could play this deck, but Attilla, if you're watching this, if there are any ways that I'm playing this that is slightly inefficient, do let me know in the comments. And yeah, let's get on to the deck guide. So again, I am aware that this deck is slightly outdated by now. I know that Attilla has a newer version of this deck with some changes that I agree with, but the thing is, I've already reviewed this particular build that they sent out just a day ago. So this deck list is relatively fresh. There are some changes that I would have made to this deck, but I was committed to checking it out and seeing what are the ways that I can play this particular build. So this is a pretty interesting deck. I'm going to talk about why this deck works in the current metagame. I'm going to talk about the overall strategy, and I'm going to talk about each character's roles in this particular deck, and I am going to talk about what are the ideal first turns you can have, what are the ideal starting cards you can have, and what are the different packages of cards that you play in this particular deck. So this deck is a really good deck in today's metagame because it is able to do two things. It's able to outvalue tanky decks with its quick burst setups. This deck runs things such as Kelsa's Art and runs things like Liu Su that enables you to set up your 2 energy bursts very quickly. If you don't already know, Yoimiya and Collei only require 2 energy to get their burst online, and once you get these bursts set up, you'll be able to deal big elemental reaction damage, and you're able to have a lot of end phase attacks as well through the use of burning or through the use of Collei's burst. The second metagame consideration that we have here is that this game can strangely control OTK decks as well, because this deck is able to race against OTK decks to set up overload potential. So through the use of Yoimiya's burst and Keqing's Electro attacks, you'll be able to set up overload attacks so that you can apply overload damage to your opponent's team and swap out their character into a character that is not ideal for them to execute their OTK plan. For example, if you are playing against Ayaka Freeze, usually they have Ayaka, Xingqiu, and Chongrin. What you can do through the use of Overload is that you can force them to go into Xingqiu, such that they will not be able to apply freeze pressure on your characters. Or you might even be able to use Overload to swap them to Ayaka at the end of their turn, such that the Ayaka loses that passive Chiral infusion. So from a metagame perspective, this is a pretty interesting deck. It is a little bit different from most decks these days because most decks run 2 of the same elements so that you can access to the extra elemental dice. But this is a rainbow deck, much like the deck that I reviewed in my very first video, which is Fatui, Pyro Agent, Collei, and Fischl. So again, what is the deck's overall strategy? Basically, the deck is a mid-range aggro control deck that is super flexible. As I mentioned earlier, you can do a lot of damage through elemental reactions, so it can be very aggro, but it's also quite control-ish in a sense whereby you are able to use overload or force your opponents to switch their characters because they don't want a certain character to die. So in a sense, this is a mid-range deck. It may not run as quickly as the other FTK or OTK decks, but given the value that this particular combination of cards can give, I do think that it is a very powerful deck. Now that we've looked at the team and the overall strategy, let's look at the different characters that we have here and the roles that they play within the deck. So first up, we have Yoimiya. If you don't already know, Yoimiya is a very busted card. If the leaked patch notes of 3.4 are to be believed, she is probably going to get nerfed, but let's enjoy the aggressive pressure that she brings while we still can. But essentially, she's really powerful for the deck because she is able to enable big damage with a burst. Essentially, what her burst does is that it deals 3 pyro damage, only costs 2 energy to set up, deals 3 pyro damage, and creates 1 Aura's Blaze. Aura's Blaze is an effect that is very powerful when used in collaboration with Collei and Keqing. Essentially, Aura's Blaze is a field effect that lasts for 2 rounds, and it says after a character other than Yoimiya uses a skill, it deals 1 pyro damage. So if you want to use this with Collei, it deals a lot of damage over time. Essentially, once Aura's Blaze is online, you go into Collei. Collei uses her elemental skill, for example, applies Dendro damage for 3 damage, and then Aura's Blaze triggers for burning, and it deals 1 pyro damage from Aura's Blaze, deals 1 extra damage from burning for a total of 5 damage, and it also creates an instance of Burning Flame that deals 1 damage during the end phase. So through using only Collei's skill, you'll be able to deal a total of 6 damage in total throughout the entire round. And that is really good value if you're trying to deal damage over time and trying to apply Electro reactions onto your opponents for those late game knockouts. Aura's Blaze is also really strong in collaboration with Keqing, because essentially what you can do is that you'll be able to activate a lot of overload shenanigans and overload control plays. So for example, if Aura's Blaze is online, essentially you can go into Keqing and use her elemental skill. What this would do is that you deal 3 damage for using her electro skill. Aura's Blaze would deal 1 pyro damage, plus 2 for overload for a total of 6 damage, and then after that you forcibly switch your opponent's character to the next character. And this is actually very disruptive, especially if your opponent is trying to set up a huge OTK turn, or if your opponent has a character with a burst online and is trying to use the burst. But what you can do is you're just going to use Keqing to move that particular character out of the way. So Aura's Blade is very strong within this particular deck, but the reason why I like this deck is not because of how strong it is. It is not because this deck is built around Aura's Blaze, but I like this deck because of how flexible it is. And to give an example of how flexible it is, I'll have to go on to the next character, that is Collei. So Collei is a really interesting character because she is actually the glue that brings the team together. You can either use Collei to pivot to a strategy whereby you're trying to do more damage over time, or you can use her to buff a lot of your electro damage as well, and therefore dealing a lot of damage within just one turn. Actually, through the use of Collei and her ability to deal consistent Dendro damage over time, you're actually able to deal a total of 9 damage just within turn 1. And this is through a combination of both Collei and Keqing. This can be seen if you use the following example. For example, on turn 1, you send out Keqing first, you use her elemental skill to deal 3 damage on your opponent's character. Assuming that your opponent does not switch out to another character and they still have electro damage applied to them, what you can do next is that you use Collei's specialization, Floral Sidewinder. Essentially, when you equip this card, you would use Collei's elemental skill once, which is Floral Brush, to deal 3 Dendro damage. This then activates Quicken, and then because you have applied a Dendro related reaction, you'll be able to do an additional Dendro damage to your opponent. So this deals a total of 9 damage because essentially you do 3 damage from Keqing's skill, 3 damage from Collei's skill, and then you do 1 additional damage from the Dendro and Electro Quicken reaction, and then after that you'll be able to do 1 damage from Floral Sidewinder plus 1 damage from the Quicken buff. So for a total of 9 damage within turn 1, I do think that is a pretty good value play. Apart from that, you can also use Collei to consistently trigger your your burning tail and your burning token as well, because essentially through the use of Collei and her elemental burst, you'll be able to do 2 Dendro damage, and then you also summon 1 Collei Ember, which also deals 2 Dendro damage during the end phase. So if you are able to spread the Dendro damage across your opponent's board, And if you go over to Yoimiya and use her burst or use her pyro-infused attacks, essentially you'll be able to consistently create burning damage over and over again. Another combo that you can have for Yoimiya is that once Yoimiya's burst is set up and has Aura's Blaze online, essentially you go over to Collei and then you use a Floral Brush, and you'll be able to, as I mentioned earlier in the Collei, in the Yoimiya guide, what you'll be able to do is that you'll be able to do 3 dendro damage, and then you'll be able to do 1 damage from the Aura's Blaze, and then 1 additional damage from the Aura's Blaze burning reaction, and then you'll be creating 1 burning token for the end phase damage. So Collei is a really good character because she is able to pivot your strategy between a damage over time strategy or a go tall with Keqing strategy. Next up, you have Keqing, and Keqing is actually a really good character to play if you love recursion and combos like I do, because with her elemental skill, Stellar Restoration, you are able to do 3 electro damage and create 1 Lightning Stiletto. Lightning Stiletto is basically a quick swap into Keqing, so what you can do is that you can play Keqing, you swap into either Yoimiya or Collei to do any sort of elemental reaction that you want to do at that time, and then in order to quickly swap back into Keqing, what you can do is that you can play the Lightning Stiletto and bring her back instantaneously, and then what this does is that it also gives Keqing Electro Infusion, right? And when she has Electro Infusion, essentially it means that all of her normal attacks has Electro damage as well. So what a scenario that could happen is that you play Keqing, you use her Stellar Restoration, and then you go over to Yoimiya, you use her Aura's Blaze, and then in next turn, essentially with Keqing's Lightning Stiletto, you can just play it, and then you can infuse all of her normal attacks with Lightning Infusion. With the Lightning Infusion, what you can then do is to go off with a lot of Overload extra damage and Overload combo. With the additional Lightning Infusion, you can also use things such as the Northern Smoke Chicken to reduce the cost of your next normal attack. So what this means is that you can, assuming you used Yoimiya in the previous turn, you can now use 3 dice to use Lightning Stiletto to return to Keqing, and then you can use the chicken to do 2 electro damage with the normal attack with 2 dice, and then use your remaining 3 dice for an additional 2 electro damage. And do keep in mind that all of these electro damage will be further buffed with the use of the additional overload damage that will be coming from Yoimiya. So it means that for a total of 8 dice, you can actually threaten a total of 6 times 3 damage, a total of 18 damage when Aura's Blaze is available. Keqing is also a really good character because essentially if you're able to use Yoimiya and Collei to deal a lot of damage to your opponent's board over time, the moment you are able to get Keqing's Elemental Burst online, you can actually do 4 damage and 3 piercing damage to all of your opponent's characters on standby, which means that you might be able to do a team wipe. I do have an example of this in one of the later gameplays that I have, so yeah, do take a look at the gameplay video later. So now that we looked at all 3 characters so far, let's look at how the deck plays and what you want to have in your opening hand and what your first turns can look like. So for the opening hand, there are a few cards here that I like to roll for. Specifically, I like to have Collei's Specialization, Floral Sidewinder. The next cards I like to have would be Liu Su. The next card I would like to have is Kelsa's Art, Leave It To Me, and Changing Shifts or Northern Smoke Chicken. So these are the 5 cards that I would like to have in my hand, and I would also go through why I like them in the 2 scenarios I'll be giving you later. I'll be walking you through 2 possible starting plays, depending on the kind of team that your opponent is sending out. So as mentioned earlier in the video, there are 2 key types of teams that are running rampant in the current metagame. Basically, you have the kind of teams that deal a lot of damage, that are very aggressive and try to apply a lot of elemental reaction on you just so that they can go off for a 1-turn kill or a first-turn kill. The second type of team that you have are the tankier teams whereby you don't really know if they are able to apply elemental reactions on you, but what they want to do is to stall you out and then set up their recovery as much as possible so that they can go for a late game win. So those are the 2 key types of metagame considerations that we have. And for both scenarios, we have different types of turn 1 plays. So in scenario 1, if your opponent is playing an aggro deck that can apply elemental reactions on you, because they're trying to set up for OTK turns, such as Ayaka Freeze or Yoimiya, or if they're able to cause big damage against you early with things like 2 energy bursts through the use of Fatui Pyro Agent or Stonehide Lava Troll, essentially what you want to do is that you want to damage your opponent's team as quickly as possible so they can kill off at least one character on their side. The reason why you have to kill off one character as soon as possible is because this results in an increased tankiness of your team, because the less elemental reactions they can apply on you, the less damage you take across the entire team, right? And the second reason why you want to take out at least one character from that team as soon as possible is because there is a clearer win coin plan for you here, because your opponent can now only switch between 2 different characters, and therefore their moves become a lot more predictable. So to give an example of what you would do in scenario 1, whereby your opponent is playing a very aggressive deck that is trying to deal electro or rather elemental reactions on you, I am going to walk through one of the gameplay that I'll be showing you later as well. So this is just a step-by-step guide on what you should be doing in your opening turns. I will still be showing this gameplay later on during this video to kind of show you what I was thinking throughout the different turns that I was taking. But essentially, I thought it would be good to just show you an example right here on what the opening plays should be. So with this deck, I can tell that my opponent is trying to apply elemental reaction on me because they have a Mona here, they have a Keqing here, and they have a Jean here that's trying to spread that elemental reaction. So essentially what I want to do is that I want to be sure that I have certain cards in my hand. So here, I tried to mulligan for Elusu, I'm trying to mulligan for Leave It To Me, I'm trying to mulligan for Caustic's Art. Because essentially, I'm going to go for the strategy whereby I go tall with Keqing and Collei to deal as much damage to my opponent's characters as possible to kill at least one of them. Right? So what I do first is that my opponent sends out Mona, and I send out Keqing here, right? And then essentially what happens here is that I use Keqing's skill to apply Electro first. What I do next is that I play Liusu, I play Leave It To Me to swap over to Collei. This allows me to create 1 energy onto Collei already, and then I apply the elemental skill from Collei onto Mona to do an additional 3 damage here. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring Mona down to 1 HP because I didn't have Collei's specialization, but ideally if you have Collei's specialization, Mona should be down to just 1 HP. But I was still very happy with this particular play because essentially it means that on my turn 2, I'll be able to use Collei's burst onto Mona, bring her down to 1 HP, and then bring her down within the kill zone. So in turn 2, what you want to do next is that your opponent would probably... I'm actually starting first in this particular instance, but essentially on turn 2, what you want to do next is that you want to kill your opponent's current character. If it's Mona, I would want to kill it with Collei. If it's not Mona, or if it's not the first character, even better, right? I can use Collei's burst to deal additional damage onto my opponent's active character through the use of Collei's elemental burst. So what I do here is that I do the elemental burst, and then I also ensure that I have 3 Electro dice so that I can bring Keqing back to deal additional damage. So here you can see that I do play the Lightning Stiletto, and then I deal additional Quicken buffed damage to my opponent's Keqing, and therefore I was able to bring the Keqing down to 2 HP, bring Mona down to 4 HP by the end of turn 2, and this is really powerful because essentially if they do not switch their Keqing out, this Dendro guy here will essentially kill their Keqing. So this is one way that you can play out your scenario 1, which is against the very aggressive deck. Make sure that they feel a little bit pressured and they feel like they shouldn't be leaving out their main attackers onto the field, and therefore keep the gas on and keep the pressure on to them. So this is how I will play out the first few turns of scenario 1. I'll go through this in detail again in my gameplay video, but yeah, this is just a very brief summary. So looking at scenario 2, scenario 2 is where you have if you're up against a team that can be super tanky. For example, right here we have Barbara here. do not sleep on Barbara. She is very powerful because with her elemental skill, she can heal 1 HP at the end phase. And then with her elemental burst, she heals the entire team for 4 HP. So this I would classify as a very tanky deck. Or if you are, if you're not sure if your opponent is actually trying to apply any sort of elemental application on you, this is also when you should be going for scenario 2. Because here I can see that Yoimiya, she probably doesn't want to apply any sort of elemental on me because she's not able to do it efficiently in the first turn. Also with Cyno, he is not really able to do it efficiently on the first turn because his auto Electro infused attacks only come online from round 3 onwards. So what this means is that I am locked into scenario 2, which is I'm trying to bring Yoimiya's burst online as quickly as possible. And again, I'll be showing you this particular battle in the gameplay video, but I just wanted to show you what I would do in scenario 2. So in scenario 2, I am very happy that I have found the chicken here, because essentially it means that I can attack 3 times with Yoimiya, which means that I can bring her burst online. So which means for this particular game, or in this particular scenario, I'm going all in on Yoimiya. So here you can see that I attack Yoimiya once with the normal attack, and then I attack twice with the with just 2 dice because I ate the chicken salad. And then after that, I use all of my cards. I went all in. I used all of my cards, change off the pyro, and then I use the burst, and this brought the Yoimiya down to 3 HP, and I have Aura's Blaze in hand. After this, what I then did is that I swapped over to Keqing using my swap, and then I was able to do a lot of overload damage against their Cyno, against their Barbara, etc, etc. So what this means is that if you can see that your opponent isn't really applying any sort of elemental reaction, if they're just trying to set up the tankiness of their deck, just go all in on Yoimiya, I would think. Some people might disagree, but I'll go all in on Yoimiya, set up the Aura's Blaze as soon as possible, and then do some sort of overload control shenanigans to annoy your opponent while also dealing a lot of damage to them. So in summary, what I would do in scenario 2 is I would look for that chicken food thing so that I can reduce the cost of a normal attack. On turn 1, I will keep attacking Yoimiya such that I get her burst online, use her burst. On turn 2, I can either swap into Collei or I can swap into Keqing. If I swap into Keqing, what I'll do is that I will spam her elemental skill for 6 damage overload, forcing my opponents to switch characters. And then by turn 3, Keqing's burst should be set up and I can go for, hopefully, for a team kill. If I swap into Collei, essentially what I would want to do is that I'm trying to go for the damage over time. So I'll be using her elemental skills to consistently deal burning damage. So through the use of just 2 elemental skills, Collei will be able to do a total of 5 damage and creating 2 burning tokens. And that means that by turn 3, you'll also be able to play her elemental burst that allows you to activate Quicken a little bit more easily through the use of swapping into Keqing. So yeah, that is basically the summary of scenario 2 and what I would do in my turn 1 play if my opponent is playing a relatively tanky deck, or if I'm sure that my opponent will not be applying any sort of Electro or any sort of elemental reaction onto my characters. Next up, we're going to go through the different cards in the deck, and while I didn't build this deck, obviously Atilla built this deck, but I'm going to try to explain why some of the cards here are critical, and towards the end I also talk about what are some of the cards that I might swap out. So in this particular build, in the equipment space, we have Collei Specialization. We already spoke about why it's so busted. But what we also have here is Gambler's Earrings. Gambler's Earrings is important because essentially it extends the amount of attacks that you can give within 1 turn. For example, if I were to have Aura's Blaze online already, and if I attach Gambler's Earrings to Keqing, essentially what I can then do is that I can attack with Keqing's normal attack once, and then I'll be able to attack with Keqing's elemental skill once, use the Aura's Blaze, and then I'll be able to use that elemental skill again to activate the Electro infused attacks, and then I should be able to take out at least 1 character, giving me 2 dice back, and then I'll have enough dice for a 3rd attack through the use of Keqing. So Keqing is a very good candidate for Gambler's Earrings, so that you can get more value out of the different kills that you have, create more Omni dice, and go for even more attacks. And this might even set yourself up for an OTK. In terms of the different kind of dice fixes that you have within this particular deck, we have Liban here that is able to collect your unused elemental dice and create Omni dice and additional cards. But other than that, we don't really have a lot of dice fixing here, and I feel like this is fine because this is a relatively lean deck. But one thing I'll caution all of us against is being sure that you have enough Electro dice to play the Lightning Stiletto card. Because as I mentioned earlier, the way that I like to play this particular deck is that I like to swap into Yoimiya or Collei to do my elemental reaction shenanigans, and then swap back over to Keqing through the use of Lightning Stilettos. But if I don't have 3 Electro dice, I would not actually be able to play her. So similar to my Mago Genki guide, whereby I said, hey, if you are able to reroll everything just for the 3 dice, I do think that it is worth it. So yeah, I would think that, in this particular instance, if you have Lightning Stiletto in hand, don't be shy, just reroll everything and try to get those 3 Electro dice, just so that you can swap Keqing in very, very quickly. So this is the only sort of dice fix that we have in the form of Liban that gives us additional Omni dice. But yeah, I guess you can also count Timmy as a dice fixer as well, because essentially Timmy is a free card to play, and then on your 3rd turn with Timmy on the field, he will be able to give you 1 card and 1 Omni element. It does kind of fix the Electro dice issue, but not completely, because 1 Omni dice might not give you everything that you need in order to play Lightning Stiletto. So I will still be a bit cautious and be a bit more conservative if I want to play Lightning Stiletto. I would still like to reroll all of my things just to get the 3 dice. So those are the dice fixes that we have for now, but we also have something that is pretty interesting in the form of Chef Mao. Essentially, this list plays 2 different Chef Maos, and it says after playing a food event, it creates 1 random elemental dice. I do get the idea of it. I'm not sure if I love it, but essentially if you play both Chef Maos and you play something, a free food like Sweet Madame, essentially you get 2 dice for free that can allow you to play even more normal attacks. If you have Aura's Blaze, this is actually super powerful, because even if Keqing doesn't have her Electro infused normal attack online, even if she just uses her normal attack, normal physical attack, you will still be able to attack with that 2 physical damage plus the additional damage from Aura's Blaze. So it is still pretty powerful, so I can see why Chef Mao is being put here. So Chef Mao is not a dice fixer, but he is something that can give us additional dice whenever we eat food. Apart from that, you can see that in this deck we also play Chang the 9th. This allows us to draw cards, and I do think that card draw is pretty important in this particular deck, because with this deck you want to draw into your food, your energy fixes, your Liban, your dice fixes, and your specialization. So what you want to do in this deck is that you want to thin out your deck, and that is probably why you play things like Chang the 9th as well, that allows you to draw cards very, very easily. So in essence, we actually have a card fix package in here in the form of Chang the 9th and Strategize. Through the use of Strategize, you can actually just spend 1 and draw 2 cards, and that will allow you to thin out your deck and therefore draw into the cards that you actually need at that point of time. So that is basically the card thinning package. Next up, you have your energy gaining package in the form of Liu Su and some other cards. So Liu Su is a really good card just for the cost of 1. After you switch characters, if the character you switch to does not have energy, they will gain 1 energy. This is super, super important for the likes of Collei and Yoimiya, because they only need 2 energy to bring their burst online. So the moment you swap over to them with Liu Su on, essentially they are 50% on their way to activating their burst. The other card that I really like is Keqing's Art. If you looked at my previous guides, you would know that I am no stranger to Keqing's Art. This is really important as well, because essentially you can actually trick your opponent into thinking that, hey, I don't have my burst online yet, I can't really do anything, you should be safe on your next turn. But what you can do with Keqing's Art is that I can start the turn with Keqing, use a Lightning Stiletto, I switch over to Collei, and I use whatever skill that she has to create 1 energy for her, and I can play Keqing's Art to bring her skill online, her burst online, so that I can play her burst immediately in the next turn. Another thing that I can do as well is that I can use Keqing, I use Collei to activate Quicken, and then instead of you bringing Collei's burst online, what I can then do is I can swap over to Yoimiya as well, use Keqing's art to shift all the energy to Yoimiya, and it means that at the start of turn 2, I will be able to use Yoimiya's burst immediately, and therefore set up for very big tempo swing in turn 2 and turn 3. So Keqing's art is really good, but what is something that I haven't really played with enough is I haven't lost yet. I do think that this is a really good card. I just haven't really experimented with it yet, and therefore I wasn't super comfortable with it. But having played this particular list, I really like this card because essentially with this particular deck, you can expose certain setup characters like Yoimiya and Collei quite a bit. So once they die, actually, if you play this and you have I haven't lost yet, if you have 2 I haven't lost yet, you can essentially go back to your Keqing, and then you can play 2 of this, and Keqing can use her burst immediately. So I haven't lost yet is actually a really good card, and it is the final card that we have here in terms of the energy gaining package. Next up, we have the swapping package as well. We have 2 Leave It To Me's, and as I mentioned earlier, I would really like to have Leave It To Me as a starting hand card. The reason for that is because I like to use especially if I'm going second, I can use Keqing to deal Electro damage, and then after using Keqing to do Electro damage, if you don't have Leave It To Me, you can swap over to Collei. Collei can still use the Dendro damage and the Dendro skill, but sometimes your opponent might say, hey, I don't want to take that Quicken damage right now, I don't want you to get that Quicken buff, and therefore I'll swap to another character. And that can be a little bit annoying for me sometimes because I want to get my Quicken buff as quickly as possible. So I like using Leave It To Me so that after using Keqing, I can use Leave It To Me to fast action swap over to Collei, and then use Collei's elemental skill so that I can deal Quicken damage as quickly as possible. So I really like Leave It To Me. Changing Shifts is a really good card as well because essentially it means that the next time you perform Switch character, you spend 1 less elemental die. So this is also a card that cheats the cost of switching, and is actually an additional elemental dice in disguise. So I really like this because you can use this as a card that you can swap over to Yoimiya for free. If you're Lusu online, essentially you use this card. If you're Lusu online, essentially you use Keqing, you attack once, Keqing has 1 energy, you use this to swap over to Yoimiya, and then with Lusu online, Yoimiya now has 2 different energies, and therefore you can use her skill. You can use Keqing's art, bring the energy over to Yoimiya, and then you can use her burst immediately. So I do think that Changing Shifts is a pretty good setup card that we can have as well, which is why I would also prefer to have it in my hand on turn 1. Next up, we have the food package, and this is the final package that we have. We have the NRE, we have Chef Mao that's kind of in the food package because whenever you play a food event card, you create 1 random die. But essentially we have NRE and we have a host of different food here. So with NRE, it is a cost of 2. It says when you play, you can draw 1 food event card from your deck, so it does help to thin your deck out and helps you to draw the important food that you want to draw. The different food that we have would primarily be Lotus Flower Crisp that allows you to take 3 less damage in the next time. This might be really good because it can bait your opponent into thinking, oh, you don't want to use your elemental burst right now, because if you use elemental burst right now, you might not get the full value out of it. So why don't you wait for the next turn and use elemental burst later? And having that extra safe turn just for 1 more round can be a very big swing sometimes. The next food that we have is the Northern Smoked Chicken. As mentioned earlier, this is pretty good as well because it means that your character's next normal attack costs 1 less unaligned element. This is really good for characters such as Yoimiya if you're trying to set up a burst within just 1 turn. The other food that we have is Sweet Madame. Is just the basic healing food. Cost 0, really good, really efficient, just heals the target character for 1 HP. So now that I've looked at all the different cards here, I really like this list because it's very flexible, it's very mid-range, and I love mid-range decks. The only gripe I have about it is that I'm not so sure about the Chef Mao and the NRE package here, because sometimes I feel like if I have 1 die left to play Chef Mao, I would typically prefer to play Gambler's Earrings, or I might prefer to use that 1 additional die to switch to another character so that I don't expose a certain character to certain elemental application. So yeah, I feel like most of the times when I played this deck, I haven't really played the Chef Mao and NRE package as much. It might just be a personal preference thing. But yeah, if I had a choice, I would probably swap these 3 cards out, and I would play other cards that give this deck a bit more consistency. For example, things like Favonius Library, or even play the Cathedral, or play Wang Shu In, just so that I will be able to survive for more turns and annoy the hell out of my opponents. So that's just my take about what I may switch out. I know what I don't like, but I don't know what I'd like yet for this particular deck. And I know that Attila has actually posted a new version of their deck on the Discord. So if you want to find out more, go on the Discord, reach out to Attila, and find out how they play the deck. But yeah, that is everything that I have to share about this particular deck tag. And now we'll just go on into the gameplay, and if you have any questions or any recommendations or any suggestions on how I can play this deck better, let me know in the comment section below, and I will see you in the gameplay. Okay, so this is going to be my play-by-play retelling of this particular match with this opponent, and this is also the deck that I featured in my strategy 1, which is the Go Tall strategy. So here, in my starting hand is a decent starting hand. I've got Gamblers, I've got Chef Mao, I got Liban, but what I really want was that Liban, because I recognize that I do want to go tall, and I'm able to start first. If I'm able to start first, this is actually really good because it means that I can apply Electro with Keqing. Hopefully they don't swap out. I can use Leave It to Me and use Liu Su and swap over to Collei for big quicken damage. The only downside to this particular hand, as I mentioned in the Scenario 1 strategy guide, is that I did not have Collei specialization to bring Mona's HP further down. But that is fine because we're still going to deal 3 electro damage here, and we're gonna be able to deal some quicken damage later on. So it is good that my opponent stays on because they do want to get the full value of Mona's shield through the use of her elemental skill. But essentially now I use Leave It to Me and I play Yusu so that I can swap over to Collei, give her 1 energy,
I'll ensure your safety.
and then turn a dice into a Dendro dice and play the Floral Brush so that I can deal an additional 3 damage to her and therefore trigger Quicken. So my opponent is probably gonna swap out here because they just use Changing Shifts, which I don't particularly mind because none of my opponents have any sort of element applied to them, and I'm going to spend my first attack of the next turn using Collei's Burst anyway, so I didn't mind which character they swapped into. It would have been an issue if they quick swap into Jean and then end their turn so that they can use Skill Blade on my Collei, but luckily that is not what they did. And they did get some piercing damage on me through the use of Keqing and the Hydro application, but that is still fine. I am still able to keep Collei alive and use her burst. So if you recall earlier, I am just trying to reroll everything so that I can play the Lightning Stilettos, and luckily I have just about enough elemental dice in order to play Lightning Stiletto, so the plan remains the same. Wanted to give Sweet Madame to Collei because I fully recognize that if I do not give her 1 more HP, essentially she may die from Keqing since their Keqing already has a weapon attached to them. So I do the Elemental Burst.
Incoming.
Yep, and they are able to do 4 damage, so thanks to the Sweet Madame, my Collei stays alive. I was actually considering if I should swap over to Yoimiya, because if I do that, it means that Yoimiya will get 1 energy online, and therefore I will be able to use the rest of my dice to bring her burst on by allowing her to attack once. But what I decided to do was to go for the damage, because I really do want to kill off their characters and see if they want to leave Keqing on or not. But it seems like they do go into the Gillblade and they go into the Collei. I am still not too pressured by this, I believe, and I think I just end my turn here. And as you can see, I just have NRE chilling there. There could be a world whereby NRE is really valuable to me, but I have not had enough experience with NRE yet to make that call. So it's just chilling there as a dice fixer for me. So here I am pretty much just trying to waste their time leaving Collei in, so that they will have to spend dice in order to kill off my Collei. But what I saw after, getting the additional card is that I haven't lost yet, which is really, really good, because essentially it means that if they do kill off Collei, I'll be able to use it and use Keqing's burst. So just like that, I was able to take out both Jean and Keqing and leave Demona down to 1 HP. And this did feel pretty good from my side, and it does show that going the tall aggro route with the Collei and Keqing combination does work here. GG to my opponent, thank you for the game, and we'll go on to the next game, which is Scenario 2. So this next game is a play-by-play commentary on the game that we've already walked through in Scenario 2. It is the same game against Yoimiya, Cyno, and Barbara. So as mentioned earlier, because when I looked at this team, I could tell that my opponent probably isn't going to try to apply any sort of elemental reaction on me on turn 1. Neither are they likely able to do a first turn kill on any of my characters, and therefore I saw the northern chicken in my hand and I thought, yep, it is Yoimiya time. So what I did is that I probably just keep my hand, I believe. I think this is a pretty good hand because I can go all in on Yoimiya, and then if I'm blessed by the dice roll gods, I should be able to have all the different dice that I need to play her burst. And if I'm able to do that, I can play Timmy's for free and get free value by round 3. So I keep my entire hand, hoping that I get a good roll here, because if not, my strategy will be in big trouble. Unfortunately, we only get 1 pyro dice here, which is pretty bad. I try to reroll everything and we get just 1 additional pyro dice. So this is actually a terrible situation to be in, which means that we need to sack almost all of our cards in order to get a burst online. But I am committed to the play. I was just experimenting with this deck and I thought, yeah, this is Yoimiya time. I want to see what she does. So my opponent goes first. I suspect that it will probably just go for the normal attack anyway, because they would probably just want to set up Yoimiya just in time for Cyno to come online by round 3, I believe. Round 3 is when his indwelling level is level 2, and therefore he gets Electro infused normal attacks. So my opponent is probably trying to get the burst online in time by the end of round 1, so that they can use the burst in round 2, swap over to Barbara, do some shenanigans, and then swap over to Cyno in round 3 for the last turn of Aura's Blaze. So I do a like for like play. I do the normal attack here as well. So instead of leaving the burst for round 2, my opponent actually surprised me by playing the burst on round 1, because I didn't know if that was the best play. It's not the worst play, certainly it's not the worst play, but it did surprise me because I didn't expect my opponent to play Star Signs and get the burst online right now. I also didn't expect my opponent to play the to play the Aura's Blaze because you don't really get the full value of it through Cyno unless you use Cyno's elemental skill. But essentially, I left my chicken reduced normal attack to my second attack because I didn't know what my opponent was doing. I wanted to bait them into thinking that I cannot use my burst this turn. Therefore, I opted to not use it for my first attack and let them see that I have 6 dice left. But now that they have passed, I just thought, yep, it is burst time. I attack one more time with the normal attack, and then I use the burst by burning all of my cards. So now, if you realized, I basically burned every card except for Leave It To Me because now I need the Leave It To Me to quickly go on to my next character, which I am hoping is Keqing. But unfortunately, my luck today, or rather in this particular match, is just pretty terrible, and I didn't really get a good die roll out of it. Regardless, it means that I have to play Keqing now. There's no way I can play Collei because I'll have to burn even more cards just to play Collei's abilities. So my opponent does go into the Barbara, probably trying to use Leave It To Me, Showtime or something, and deal vaporize damage on my Yoimiya. Yep, it is Let the Show Begin, and I take 1 additional damage, luckily leaving Yoimiya at just 1 damage, or rather 1 HP. I'll prefer for her not to die until I draw a... what is it called? I've not lost yet. Yep, that's the one. So instead of doing a quick swap into Keqing, I left Leave It To Me. The reason for that is because my opponent only has 2 dice left. They are not playing any sort of double elemental character here, which tells me that they don't have an additional elemental dice, and therefore there's nothing else they can do this turn other than to swap their characters around. So I just played Keqing. They do swap into Cyno, which is really interesting. I don't really know why they did that, but essentially allows, maybe they're just trying to set up for the next turn, right? But essentially this allows me to deal a lot of damage onto Cyno, a total of 6 damage, which I was pretty happy with. And it does the overload there as well, and goes over to Barbara. So I have 2 choices here. I can either just do a measly 4 damage through the use of Keqing's normal attack, plus the Aura's Blaze. Actually, I think that would be, what, 3 damage instead? I can either do a measly 3 damage, or I can burn all my cards again to do an elemental skill. And of course, being the gambler I am, I think I decide to burn all my cards to deal 6 damage to Barbara, because having the team at 3-4-4 is a lot better than having the team at 3-4-7, and Barbara is a huge threat, as I mentioned earlier in the summary for scenario 2. Barbara is a menace once she has her burst set up, so I want to kill Barbara as quickly as possible. So I just burn everything and I deal the big damage. And here I have the I haven't lost yet, which is something that I was pretty happy to see because it means that I can safely swap into Yoimiya, let her die, play I haven't lost yet, and then play Keqing's burst here. I think that was the play I was trying to go for, which is why I tried to reroll everything, so I'm going all in on the Keqing idea. So they do swap over to Cyno, trying to do some damage to me. And at this point, I was actually thinking, should I really swap over to Yoimiya? If I do swap over to Yoimiya, it is true that I'm able to play my burst. But the reality is that the burst alone right now will not be able to kill their board. I will not be able to kill Cyno, and the 3 piercing will not be able to kill Yoimiya or their Barbara. So I was really reconsidering the plan here. So I take 3 damage, they are down to 4 dice, which tells me that they would not be able to burst the Cyno this turn. I decide to go for the normal attack anyway. I do not want to bring up my Yoimiya yet, so that I can bring Cyno down to a total of 3 HP, regardless of who they swap into or if they leave Cyno on. This tells me that Cyno dies, and I'm happy with that, because I do think that at the moment, since Yoimiya is not set up, Cyno is the current threat.
Surrender.
On the other hand, my opponent is just trying to, do additional damage onto my Keqing, probably trying to take her out through the use of Yoimiya in the next turn. And here I was wondering, do I want to use my Keqing burst to take out Cyno and not kill the other 2? Or do I want to go into Collei so that I can do 3 damage on Cyno and potentially bring her burst 1 step closer to being online? But I just thought, yeah, no, I just want the kill right now, and leaving my opponent at 1 HP and 2 HP is pretty good. I don't think they will be able to eat that much food or Lotus to defend their characters, so I was fine with that. And even if Keqing does die, I would be able to use, I haven't lost yet, but what I thought is, hey, I have 1 dice left, I can just swap over to Yoimiya, allow them to kill Yoimiya, get I haven't lost yet, and therefore get additional dice for more damage, or rather for more dice for more normal damage or more normal attacks I can do in the next turn. And here I was already considering, do I want to send Collei in next or do I want to send in Keqing? But I do think the right play here is to send in, send in Collei. Because Collei is not, it's not at risk of dying yet, while Keqing kind of is, so I just really wanted to get rid of the Barbara, so I continued to attack it and activated that Hyper Blue. So here you can see why Barbara is so threatening, because she is just 1 energy away. If only they had that 1 final energy here and enough dice to play that burst, essentially Yoimiya goes back to 6 health, Barbara goes back to 5 health. At the end of this turn, with whatever recovery they have, they both go back to 6 health, which is pretty disgusting, especially when I'm sitting at 10-4 at the moment. But luckily I am able to kill Barbara off and then Yoimiya comes out and I'm able to use that I haven't lost yet for an additional Omni Dice and kill off that Yoimiya. So that was it for this particular game, GG to my opponent. It was a pretty difficult one and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the game, and yeah, if you enjoyed this video today, um, give a like and subscribe, and if there's any other guides that you're interested in or any other decks you're interested in me talking about, let me know in the comment section below, and I will see you later in the next one. Cheers, bye.